Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Friday, the 21st of January 2022. We have lots to discuss with you. We'll begin, ladies and gentlemen, with what US President Joe Biden said as far as Afghanistan is concerned. And what he said, and I quote, that the United States was spending $1 billion a week in Afghanistan for 20 years and could not afford to do so indefinitely. Also, that it was not possible to unify the war-torn country under one single government. Extremely important quotes that have been attributed to Joe Biden. Why is this reasoning of the US going forward now after 20 years remaining in Afghanistan? We'll be talking about that in our first segment. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, pertains to the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022, drafted by the Ministry of Human Rights, and input from the women rights groups and lawyers that has been made part of a law of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Now, how important is the application of this law in all the right places is going to be our second segment today. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be talking about Prime Minister Imran Khan, who's had a conversation with the Bill Gates, co-chairman of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He discussed matters of shared concern, especially concerning polio eradication in Pakistan and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And also both appreciated each other's work as far as eliminating polio from the country and also tackling COVID-19 in the country is concerned. Then, ladies and gentlemen, finally, we'll be talking about China and Russia that have delayed a US effort at the United Nations to impose sanctions on 5 North Koreans in response to the recent missile launches by Pyongyang. This has been revealed by certain diplomats. This came before a closed-door United Nations Security Council meeting on North Korea, the second in 2 weeks after Pyongyang has fired tactical guided missiles this week. A lot of tension in the region. What's going to happen? How is the United Nations Security Council going to move ahead as far as North Korea is concerned? This is our last story. Then let's now begin with today's show, and of course we'll begin with what Joe Biden had to say as far as Afghanistan is concerned. Very important and very strong statements. More in the following report.
Afghanistan stands at the crossroads after hasty US withdrawal followed by crippling economic sanctions on the interim Afghan government. The Biden administration has faced harsh criticism following the US withdrawal and the chaotic evacuation at Kabul airport. US President Joe Biden at his second White House press conference expresses no regret for pulling troops out of Afghanistan due to the inability to unify Afghanistan under one single government. President Joe Biden stated that he wasn't willing to continue pouring billions of dollars in military spending into Afghanistan. He noted that there was no easy way to pull troops out of the country after 20 years, defending the chaotic withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is in the grip of a humanitarian disaster worsened by economic sanctions imposed by Western countries. Washington-based U.S. Institute of Peace, in its latest reports, reminds the U.S. and its allies that humanitarian aid alone cannot prevent an economic collapse in Afghanistan. During the third meeting of the Apex Committee on Afghanistan, Pakistan Prime Minister called upon the international community and relief agencies to provide aid at this critical juncture to avert economic collapse and to save precious lives in Afghanistan. Earlier, Pakistan provided humanitarian aid worth Rs 5 billion, which includes food commodities, medical supplies, winter shelters, and other items. Among all the regional and global players involved in the Afghan endgame, Pakistan emerged as the most responsible actor, effectively playing the role of honest broker to assure sustainable peace in the war-ravaged country.
Mustafa Abdullah Baloch, who is a columnist and analyst, joins us online. Mustafa Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. How do you see these statements that emanate from Joe Biden? I mean, a couple of months after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. 20 years is the time that they spent in Afghanistan. Is it now that they've realized that they could not have stayed for that long because they were spending too much of money?
See, Umar, actually, the way Biden administration withdrew from Afghanistan is the reason why he's receiving so much criticism. I mean, he's also receiving criticism from those American war veterans who feel they're betrayed, like they were not consulted in this thing. I mean, how can you just, leave a country where you were having a full-fledged war, and then you leave the country, and all those Afghan people who were left betrayed. I mean, he left all those people who helped U.S. government fighting against Taliban, and now in a panic way, where the American troops left Afghanistan. So it was like, it was shocking for the whole world. So naturally, this criticism had to, be in front of Biden, and he had to face these consequences. And right now, see, Pakistan as an immediate neighbor of Afghanistan, we are facing a lot of pressure. Like all those refugees are definitely influxing in Pakistan, and we cannot afford it anymore. I mean, you leave a country and then you don't have anything to provide them. How can you just leave them like that? I
All
mean,
right,
the
then
the only
again,
thing which Biden
the question
should
comes,
do.
Mustafa, how can you leave a country like that? How can you leave a country in doldrums in an economic and humanitarian crisis after 20 years, when all of a sudden you just decide to leave within a year's time, leaving nothing behind for the people to survive properly? Why?
Exactly. The only thing which Biden can do right now is that he can provide at least a relief package for those people who helped him. I mean, what did the people of Afghanistan do? What's their fault? What's the fault of those Afghan forces? What's the fault of those translators who used to help Americans? I mean, you have left them. There's nothing they can do, and there's no development package. There's no relief package for those
Mustafa,
people.
there's a
I
question
mean,
that really
as a
comes to
superpower.
mind. There's a question, Mustafa, that really comes to mind, and I'd like your opinion on that. And I'd like to quote Mr. Joe Biden on this. He said that Afghanistan has been the graveyard of empires for a solid reason. It is not susceptible to unity. During the 20 years, Mustafa, that the US spent in Afghanistan, didn't they realize the fact? Why did they stay for 2 decades then?
Exactly, that is the point. If the history of Afghanistan is not new, it's not something fresh for anyone. People know what's the dynamics of Afghanistan. When you entered Afghanistan, you should have known all these facts. And it's obvious, we knew that Americans had to leave Afghanistan, but at least there should have been a proper way for that. I
All
mean,
right,
I
but
mean,
if
I
no,
mean, the
no.
way they left doesn't look like a mature country or a superpower would react like this. Leaving all those people. There are a lot of
All
interviews
right,
where
Mustafa,
we can
kindly
see
stay
those people
online
who.
with us. Kindly stay online with us. We've been joined by Dr. Salma Malik, who's a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Salma, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always a pleasure to have you on our show. Dr. Salma, I'm a bit amazed at the quotes or the statements that have emanated from Joe Biden as far as Afghanistan is concerned. What I would like to also know, I've just asked the question from Mustafa, did the US not realize during the 20 years that they spent in Afghanistan that, as Joe Biden quotes, and I say that Afghanistan is a graveyard of empires for a reason, it's not susceptible to unity? Why then stay 2 decades if you cannot do anything for the country?
Well, actually, now they have to cover their failures and weaknesses in Afghanistan, and they don't have the capacity to, one would say, swallow the embarrassment as well as the failure that the US has faced. Technically, it was never for the betterment of Afghanistan. The US intervention in Afghanistan was purely for self-motivated interest and self-interest that drove the US and the allies into Afghanistan. Giving Afghanistan a stable government, so long as their interests were fulfilled for 20 years, was the entire mandate that the U.S. government had. And now, because it had a ceremonial exit from Afghanistan, so first they kept on shouldering the blame on Pakistan. Now they are saying whatever they need to say to cover up all this embarrassment. So I would actually say that this is entirely for political and public consumption and nothing more than that. U.S. never really had an exit strategy. All they did was that they entered Afghanistan, first Iraq, then Afghanistan, and when they had to exit from Iraq, they really didn't know what to do. If one recalls Hillary Clinton's testimonial in front of the Congress, there were some lofty claims that the administration had made at that time, and Hillary Clinton, as the Secretary of State, had made, in which they said that the way we exited from Afghanistan, interest-wise, not that they were there physically, but the way they withdrew their patronage from Afghanistan during the Soviet withdrawal gave rise to 9/11 and so many other things, and we are not going to repeat that mistake again. But I think this time when they withdrew, they committed a much grievous and bigger mistake than they had done previously. Because
All
here,
right,
this
Dr.
time,
Salma, kindly
they
stay
were
online with us. We'll go back to Mustafa Abdullah Baloch. Mustafa, when it comes to the United States and their withdrawal, and of course you talked about the US veterans who are not very happy of not being consulted as far as the US withdrawal after 2 decades from Afghanistan is concerned. Why did this not happen? Why were the war veterans or maybe the important analysts as far as defense of the US is concerned were not put into discussion or not part of the discussion as far as the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is concerned? All right, Dr. Salma Malik, I'll revert to you and I'll ask you the same question. There was the huge quote as far as the US war veterans are concerned who are unhappy with the way they were not consulted as far as the US withdrawal from Afghanistan is concerned. Why did this not happen from a country that really consults all the different sectors when it takes an important decision?
Instance, when the US decided to intervene into Afghanistan and Iraq and all, they had a lot of convincing to do of the veterans. It was never a popular decision in the first place, and it was never a popular decision to pull out. They never really consulted the people because they didn't really feel the need. And that is precisely the point where the veterans feel angry and frustrated that their entire sacrifice and their big years, their health and everything got suffered a massive setback just because the administration instinctively decided what they wanted to do. First, they wanted to go in, then they were too quick to go out without any formula, and then they were also ready to dismiss by saying that, oh, this doesn't really matter. What you don't realize is that in case the US administration has an amnesia, the rest of the world doesn't have an amnesia. They do remember what happened in the last 20 years, and that has cost people a lot of costly lives, their health, their livelihood, and so many other things.
There's also the cost, Dr. Salma, there's also the financial cost of it that of Joe Biden has also referred to. He said that the US was spending $1 billion a week in Afghanistan. What I also don't understand is if you are spending that much of money, why then a hasty retreat? Why not plan this accordingly? Or maybe have retreated a couple of years back? Why stay 2 decades? If you were spending such a lot of money that it was a cause of concern
Umar,
for your country.
I mean, if America now finds the Afghan war a costly affair, then they should have realized that intervening into another country and trying to reinvent the wheel requires all this cost. So they have to bear with this cost. No one really asked them to enter Afghanistan or any of the countries.
Of course.
That
No one asked the US to enter Afghanistan, and no one asked them to leave in such a manner. Mustafa Abdullah Baloch, what's your point, what's your take on this as far as the financial ramifications of the US stay in Afghanistan is concerned that have been also quoted by Joe Biden as being more or less $1 billion a week for 20 years? Do you feel the US should have retreated much earlier if that was the case, if they were spending too much without any kind of a result whatsoever as per what the US wanted? Or do you think there are some other things behind all of this?
See, as a superpower, I guess US had certain responsibilities. I mean, how can you just leave a country and then you just give the country back to those forces whom you were fighting with? So say that doesn't make any sense, and that was obvious. Okay, that is something else. But later on, if the country is stranded with the people are stranded and they are left with no help, at least you can give a certain kind of financial. You were pouring dollars over there, so that was your responsibility. I mean, that was nothing like you're not giving any favor to those people. It was your responsibility. You were in a full-fledged war with Afghanistan. So I mean, giving such statements is like he's kind of hurting those people who helped the Americans fighting against Taliban. So I think Biden should revisit his Afghan policy, and he should at least think twice before saying such things which can somehow hurt the sentiments of the people in Afghanistan.
Also, a lot of people in the United States of America, as per the reports, including the US war veterans that you have mentioned earlier while we were discussing the issue. Dr. Salma Malik, Joe Biden also said that there was no way to get out of Afghanistan easily after 20 years. Was this not properly planned in your point of view?
I actually, now that you look back in those 20 years, the planning only went to the extent that the Americans wanted to enter Afghanistan with this moral high value game that they want to liberate Afghanistan from terrorist forces and fundamentalists and all that jargon that they used. And once they had been there, any of the promises that they had made to the Afghan people with regards better governance, with regards democracy, they couldn't fulfill any of those parameters. So technically, it took them 20 years for an exit. And eventually, when they did make that exit, first they made the Doha plan, and they wanted to exit according to that. And suddenly, instead of September, they pull out their forces by August. So it was all unceremonial. And I would actually say that, yes, I think it was a very ad hoc-ish arrangement. If there were any architects of U.S. policy in Afghanistan, either those architects were not consulted towards the end of it, or perhaps too many of the regime changes, Afghanistan became an orphan project for them, and it was a liability that they wanted to get rid of as soon as possible. And for Joe Biden, it is easier to quantify the cost of Afghan conflict and say that it has cost the U.S. So many billions per day, per year, or per month, plus also give this appeal that my son died in Afghanistan or one of the combat positions, and I wouldn't wish that to other parents. That makes a lot of good publicity campaigning, but that doesn't really absolve the U.S. from not shouldering its responsibility the way it was supposed to do.
That I totally agree with you. It does not absolve United States in any way whatsoever as far as the way they have left Afghanistan in a quandary. Thank you very much, Dr. Salma Malik, to have joined us and to have, of course, talked to us about this very important issue, that is the future of Afghanistan and the US perspective on its withdrawal from the country. Finally, Mustafa, Abdullah, Baloch. Is Afghanistan or was Afghanistan a liability for the US? And if so, why stay for 2 decades in it? And then why leave Afghanistan in a quandary? And then, of course, not finding a proper way to deal with it, not even unfreezing all of the money that you have frozen as far as the Afghan finances are concerned in the United States of America. What does the United States actually want from Afghanistan?
I mean, they have locked. I feel sad for the people of Afghanistan. I mean, literally, Americans have locked those people in a jail. Like they don't have anywhere to go. The Kabul airport, the visuals of Kabul airport was like crazy. I mean, nobody could leave Kabul. And secondly, if it's about the financial aspect, then this is a prime responsibility of Biden, that he should at least do something for those people of Afghanistan. At least he should manage something for them rather than giving such statements. I mean, Pakistan will be definitely affected with this because of the close borders with Afghanistan, and because these Afghanis will definitely have certain hope from Pakistan that, okay, for example, this is a situation, they can move to Pakistan, but Pakistan cannot afford such situation. So, I mean, this is a high time that at least Biden and the international world should join heads and at least, do something for the people of Afghanistan and help them and give them a sense, a hope, at least a hope, so that they can, feel that they're not left alone at this crucial time.
Thank you very much, Mustafa Abdullah Baloch, columnist, analyst, who have joined us and who have talked to us about Afghanistan. Hope, I will take that word from his last statement. Hope is extremely important, and hope is something that is pertinent for the people of Afghanistan. They need to be given that hope, whether it be through proper statements, whether it be through aid, humanitarian and otherwise, or whether it be through the support of the countries in the West, because as far as their neighboring countries are concerned, we, especially in Pakistan, are supporting the Afghans as much as we can, and also highlighting the Afghan issue across the world. Let's come to our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Amendment Bill 2022. It has been made part of the law thanks to the Ministry of Human Rights and the women rights groups and lawyers that contributed towards this very important law, and it has been amended from the last law that was put into place in 2010. Also, what is extremely important right now is that this law be applied in letter and spirit across all the institutions. More in the following report.
Harassment is rooted in gender-based discrimination and creates an abusive, hostile work environment for women. Marking a commendable step, Pakistan's parliament has passed the Protection Against Harassment of Women at Workplace bill, which was enacted on January the 14th. Building on the principle of equal opportunity for men and women and their right to earn a livelihood without fear of discrimination as stipulated in the Constitution, this bill was drafted with extensive input from women rights groups and lawyers. Pakistan's previous workplace harassment law, the Protection Against Harassment of Women at the Workplace Act 2010, left much to be desired, particularly the restrictive definition of harassment. Because of the restrictive definition of harassment, the burden was placed on the complainants to prove the sexual intent of the perpetrator. After detailed deliberations, the scope of law has been expanded to universities, art studios, women participating in sports and working online, effectively covering various employment models. Signaling a monumental shift, the bill aims to amend the definitions provided in the Act, particularly those of complainant, employee, employer, harassment, and workplace, to remove ambiguities that litigants have faced. Workplace harassment unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance by creating an intimidating, offensive working environment, and to ensure participation of women in all spheres. These encouraging amendments spark new hope. Harassment is rooted in gender-based discrimination and
partner of Esquare Legal and also a barrister himself joins us online. Safi, thank you very much to have joined us. Safi, now that this very important law has been amended and made part of Pakistan's constitution and law, how important is it to apply it in letter and spirit across all the different institutions where it is pertinent to be applied? And how important is it also for the government to follow it up?
Omar, what you're saying is what the root of the problem is. Now, the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act 2010 was passed only 10 years ago. And in my experience, as a lawyer who goes to the court, who has several cases of following up issues of sexual harassment, that law was never implemented, even though it was a good piece of law. The problem was always implementation. The problem was that tribunals were not fully functional. Half of the times they did not have judges, especially here in Islamabad. There were long periods of time when there was absolutely no one. So as a result, anyone who was going to these ombudsmen was not getting any justice, even though there were provisions of law that they could have easily implemented. So I feel the problem here is not the fact that we have more laws coming in, but rather the fact that the government does not sanction the funds necessary for the implementation of these laws. I'll give an example, for instance. The United Kingdom has a law, which is the Human Rights Act of 1998. That law is close to 24 years old now. That law covers sexual discrimination and is the central go-to place for sexual discrimination. The courts have given effect to the Human Rights Act to include sexual discrimination. And that law is continuing to serve the purpose because the courts there are functioning and they are giving strength to that law. I don't feel like we need consistently more legislation as much as we need the implementation of these legislations so that they take root. So as far as this law is concerned, of course, it's a welcome change. I like the fact that it has provisions for transgenders. I like the fact that it has specific provisions for domestic workers. But other than that, I don't really see what major change it has brought about to the law that already existed and what the law was already providing. So in my opinion, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that implementation is key here. It's not the legislation its implementation.
All right. Safi, when we talk of implementation, of course, as you said, this is key here. This is also key after the previous law that was passed in 2010 is concerned. And of course, 12 years later, we have an amendment that is extremely important. Nevertheless, the main question remains that of implementation. What needs to be done? What are the different steps that you as a lawyer understand could be implemented? What are the ladders that one needs to step up one by one in order to properly implement it?
All right. So I think the first thing that we need is a proper ombudsman for this. The head of this should be a person who has a strong legal background, who understands what the law is, and who's able to impart the training that is necessary to all the other judges who are then appointed. The second step would be sanctioning of the funds, so that such ombudsman could be placed all over the country and then effectively funded, so that they have the due staff. There's never a staff shortage. There's never a shortage of resources. For that, the thing that I would recommend is a proper training. Now, I just once again, for my own personal experience, the few times I've been to the ombudsman, it was a terrible experience, simply because the judges did not have any understanding of this very simple piece of legislation. And until and unless these judges are well trained on what this legislation says, and not just this legislation, also the CRPC, the PPC, and the various other legislations, I don't feel like it's going to go anywhere. Also, I see we have just been joined by Barrister Ambreen Qureshi.
Yes,
it's an honor to have such a luminary with us. I think she knows more about harassment laws than anyone in the country. As a personal example, I personally call her up sometimes when I want to learn more. So I would be looking to learn more from her.
So we are going to revert to Barrister Ambreen Qureshi to learn and understand more as far as harassment of women and the laws that govern it are concerned. Barrister Saiba, thank you very much to have joined us. Barrister Saiba, when it comes to this amendment law that has been now made part of Pakistan's constitution, we were talking with the Barrister Safi about its implementation and how key it is for this to be implemented at the right places at the right time. Are there any lacunas in the implementation of such laws, and if so, how can they be overcome?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you, Safi, for your kind words. Yes, Omar, I feel that implementation will not start at the ombudsman. It will start at the workplace, and we have to make sure that the first committee that is formed upon a complaint being filed, that is done as per law. That never happens. I must have done over about 100 cases of sexual harassment to date of big multinational companies. And one of the main issues that arise is the individuals who are bestowed this responsibility of taking up a complaint are unaware of the law. They are unaware of the procedures. They are unaware of how to send, once a complaint has been filed, how to address the other party, the accused, how to send that notice to him, how to ensure that within 7 days he replies. And also that this is not only for women, I must say that this is not just for women. This law is made for men and women. And I happen to have...
And transgenders as well now.
Is a male who has been harassed. So these are the things that these people, these organizations, these workplaces are unaware of, and we need to make sure that there is awareness and also there are proper training in these departments. And as Safi was saying when I joined, that the ombudsman also needs to understand the law and the value of evidence, the complaint being filed. So not to have that thing that as a rule of thumb, let me say that as a rule of thumb, that any complaint that is coming is genuine is also wrong. It is also against our human rights, and it's also against a right to fair trial. So all of this actually needs to be implemented, and it needs to be highlighted at every forum. Merely making a complaint does not make you win a sexual harassment complaint, because there are procedures that need to be followed. You need to make sure that you bring in evidence and you go through the entire process and then get a proper judgment. But what happens is, and what we have seen in the past is that once such a situation arises, there is an automatically closure for the person who's accused, and it will be utopian to say that he'll ever bounce back. And all of these elements have to be looked into to ensure that we are following the Human Rights Declaration and our Constitution of right to dignity and right to fair trial.
That is so true. But now, Barrister Saiba and Safi, I'm going to ask you this one question. I was talking to a family friend who works for a huge international global organization, which I would not like to name here. And she told me that she's been to different countries across the world and she has been harassed at more than one times. And she has also reported this harassment. And I'm trying to not just specify Pakistan, but going a bit beyond it as well. Why is there such a threat as far as the women folk are concerned? If they complain as far as their harassment is concerned, of them losing their jobs. And this is what she was telling me, that in that huge global organization as well, there were threats against her when she complained as far as her harassment was concerned, that her job will be terminated. Why is this a global phenomenon not being treated properly? I'll begin with you, Safi.
Right. So I think it's once again a very good question as to why women continue to suffer. And this is, I don't feel this is a matter of law as much as it is a matter of society. I feel like the fact remains that men and women have been working in workplaces together only in the last 100 years or so, ever since the advent of industrialization. Before that, traditionally, at least in our part of the world and even in Europe and other places, men and women used to have different workplaces. I feel this is a bit of an adjustment problem. People are not understanding how to work together with the opposite gender just as yet. There has been this sudden advent of the way workplaces have changed. Women have gotten a lot of rights. And whereas this is a very good thing, I feel like this has led to complications that still need addressing, not just in Pakistan and in the East, but also in the West, because these behaviors are prevalent all over the world. But getting back to this act, there's something that I noticed and something that I would want to bring forward as a problem that I might have. And this is a very relevant question that you have raised. So the act says that any discrimination on the basis of gender would also be harassment. Now, I, as an employer, have female employees and male employees, and I make it a point not to send my female employees to, for instance, the Thana for filing an FIR, let's say to a village, if I had to. I would prefer to send a male employee. I do so simply because I care for their well-being. But this act does not point out the difference between care for well-being and what harassment would otherwise be. So say if a female employee wanted to go to a police station in a far-flung place in a village, and she felt like going there would earn her a little extra money, and I would disagree with that decision because, once again, I would think that she would be putting herself in harm's way, given the way the society and culture of Pakistan still is. I could be accused of harassment. And when things like these start happening, if employers like me, who want to take care of their female employees, start getting accused of harassment, say because the law is not clear, as is the case right now with this amended bill, then there would be a problem of terminations. There would be a problem of lack of employment opportunities, because then I would feel as a male employer or even a female employer who would discriminate on the basis of gender just because of the prevalent cultural environment we have, they would feel like they stand to lose more if they were to employ a female rather than a male.
All right.
So
that's a very interesting perspective. That's a very interesting perspective. Ambreen, what would you like to say about that?
For me, Omar, I think there is no doubt about the fact that women in this country and globally as well are the ones, who actually face sexual harassment. And it is very encouraging to see this law. There is no doubt about that. I also appreciate the fact that things like domestic violence is being addressed, things like online work is also being is also made part of it. And that is how it should be. There is fantastic, I think there are fantastic developments as far as the law is concerned. And that is required to ensure that there is, in this society, what I feel, or even in general, that we don't have a gender neutral society. And that is why problem arises. Where you start respecting both the genders, these issues will not arise. But unfortunately, women being weaker sex are considered to be vulnerable enough to be harassed and to be, taken advantage of. And that is why I feel that these laws will protect women of Pakistan, and other such laws all over the world will ensure their protection. Because before that, large number of women, 90%, or let me say 99% of the women were facing workplace harassment. They had no avenue to go to. And this is absolutely welcoming to see such a legislation where people can actually go and ensure that there is, there is some sort of vindication. What I'm only concerned about is these cases don't arise. The first stage is not the ombudsman. The first stage is the workplace where they're working. May that be a small organization of 5 people, may that be a big organization of multinational company, having this. But from my experience, from the cases that I have dealt cases where one of our citizen was working in another country, I wouldn't name it, but she was harassed, and the way they all worked together and the way that they formed the committee and the way that they initiated the proceeding ensured that the alleged accused was suspended till the final decision of the hearing, ensured that the decision, while they were coming forward with their recording of witness statements, there was no sort of intimidation by either of the party. So all these steps have to be taken, and for that, I think, merely writing this on a piece of paper will not make
I
a
totally
change.
agree. Now, Ambreen, I'm going to ask the next question to the both of you, and I'll begin with Safi as we are going in a certain order. Ambreen, you talked about committees that have been formed. I mean, you gave the example of this lady who is working in another country and a committee that was formed. Safi and Ambreen, this next question is for the both of you. I'll begin with Safi. Inquiry committees in public and private organizations, how important or how is that, and how quickly can those inquiry committees be established in the public and private space across the country in Pakistan? A, and B, there's also a lot of talk in different avenues to ratify the ILO Convention 190 on sexual harassment at the workplace. Is that possible in the near future as well? I'll begin with Safi.
Right. So I think when you talk about the formation of inquiry committees, be it in public sector organizations, big companies, wherever, the law is very clear, and it's actually quite simple. All you need to do is you need to make a committee of 3 people, put in a woman, and there's a time limitation. Ambreen would probably know what the time limitation is. That inquiry committee then holds an investigation, calls over everyone, and the procedure is fairly simple, very, very quick. There is absolutely no need for it to be lingered on, and it applies across the board, not just to big companies, to small companies, to NGOs, everywhere. So I don't see any problems in making inquiry committees, and those inquiry committees, as Ambreen very correctly pointed out, are the starting point, and they are all important because their decision of course, their decision can be challenged in the ombudsman. There are a lot of cases in which the decisions of the inquiry committees have been challenged, and rightly so. But the inquiry committees are the fact-finding committees. They are the ones who delve into the appreciation of the evidence. And so here's the first part. I think a simple day training, perhaps, or singular day training of any organization, of telling them what the basics of evidence are, who the committee members can be, what the committee ought to behave like, how they are to serve notices, which is very, very simple. Honestly, it's no-brainers. They could have these things up and running in absolutely no time. This is not a difficulty within the law, and I feel this is the beauty of the 2010 Act. The fact that it did make inquiry committees, and that was a massive step forward from what we had previously. As far as the ILO convention is concerned, I believe Pakistan would be the second country after Fiji in Asia to ratify.
If it ratisfies.
If it ratifies it, Pakistan would be the second country after Fiji. Fiji is the only Asian country at the moment. I feel like the direction that the law is heading towards, it is likely to ratify it because there's a lot of pressure. The government feels like it needs to. I feel this law itself was the result of substantial pressure. Whilst we're here and whilst we're talking about something, there is since we have an expert with us, Ambreen, who I've already stated that I respect tremendously. I did feel like this particular amendment targets one case in particular, and there was a lot of talk of gig, concert studio, performer, specifically named for a particular industry. I don't see the point of naming or pointing out one specific industry which has created considerable considerable talk of sexual harassment within Pakistan, but perhaps Ambreen would be
All
able
right,
to comment.
Ambreen, and let's go towards you. Let's revert towards you. We're a bit short of time, so I'd really like your point of view on these two very important points: the committees as well as the ratification of this ILO Convention 190 on sexual harassment, and also the perspective that Safi has put forward.
Yes, first of all, this perspective Safi has put forward, I think it will be very unfortunate to pick out one particular case that is still pending, and it is actually still ongoing, to kind of use that as the platform to create the new law. The law is for people, all citizens of Pakistan, and I'm not going to even recognize the fact that some individuals are using that particular case as a reason why this law was made. This law, I think, should have been made, and I think it is made because of the loopholes that were pre-existing. And I hope that it is being used by people, and it will be used by people who are not going to waste the Ombuds' time, and is going to make sure that there are we're going to make sure there are no frivolous applications anymore. But coming back to, again, the inquiry committee, committee is the first stage. It is the first point. And like Safi said, one woman has to be there. There should be two men. What I have seen from the sexual harassment cases that I have filed, a lot of organizations take 2 months or 3 months to do this, whereas I think according to law, it is within the 7 days of the first complaint being received. That needs to be looked into. But then once the inquiry is made, then procedure, they have already laid that out in 2010, which is very comprehensive and actually very good. So I don't think the law itself had any issue as regards to inquiry committee. That's there. It's the implementation, once again, that needs to be looked into. If you're looking for a better society, if you're looking for a safer society for women, and for men as well, we need to make sure that inquiry committees are done as per law, are made as per law, and the procedure is followed. That I don't really see happening unless it's a big multinational company. Now, coming back to your second point, which is the ILO, yes, I think that is also, I agree with Safi, that is something that they should be doing, and I think they're probably in the process of doing, so that shouldn't be something of a surprise that that's coming up. There was already a lot of pressure on them, and they're making sure that they abide by it and they're following it. So I think overall it's a good step. Overall, they have looked at the things that were missing, but at the same time, I will reiterate and I will highlight that frivolous complaints without evidence, no matter what modification you do, they will always be thrown out. There is a law and there is a procedure. And secondly, this forum, this law does not give anyone right to start using social media as some sort of campaign against the accused, because that is something that should be deterred. This law is for genuine cases where a lot of women are, which a lot of women in Pakistan are facing. So nobody should, misuse it, basically.
Thank you very much, Barrister Ambreen Qureshi Saab, a human rights lawyer, as well as Barrister Saif Ullah Ghauri, Managing Partner, Esquare Legal, to have joined us. Thank you to the both of you to have given us your perspective and your points of views. What we want, once this law has been made, of course, part of Pakistan's law, is that the workplaces become a safe haven, an accessible haven for both men, women, and transgenders. Here's hoping for that to happen very quickly and very effectively. Let's come to our last two segments, ladies and gentlemen. The first is the telephonic conversation between Bill Gates and our Prime Minister Imran Khan. Efforts to eradicate polio and COVID-19 were discussed during this conversation. We all know the efforts that the Bill and Melinda Foundation have been putting forward as far as the eradication of polio is concerned. And also Bill Gates appreciated Pakistan's stance as far as the eradication of polio as well as controlling COVID-19 is concerned. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, our last story of the day concerns China and Russia that have blocked the US bid to sanction North Koreans at the United Nations. Now, the US is seeking travel ban by the United Nations and the freezing of assets on these individuals, it says, are involved in North Korea's missile program. This was said before a closed door meeting that is going to happen of the United Nations Security Council on North Korea, the second in 2 weeks, and of course Pyongyang that fired tactical guided missiles this week. This is the fact that has resulted in this closed door meeting and these statements by the United States. Let's hope some sense prevails into all of those countries across the world. What we need is a safe place and a safe world, and a place where we can call wherever we go our home, first, second or third. The world, the people across the world need that safety. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. This is the last day of the week. We'll see you inshallah on Monday with new stories and segments. As I always end my program, kindly follow the SOPs, get yourselves vaccinated. The positivity ratio is really surging ahead everywhere in Pakistan. So you need to be extremely prudent, extremely careful. Allah Hafiz and have a great weekend.